Hello everyone, I'm your storyteller and welcome to Mr. Night Murmurs. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now, and don't forget when you like, comment, and subscribe. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. After I finished my degree, I did not really have a plan. I was working at a bookstore in Seattle, barely making rent and scrolling through job sites late at night. I saw a posting for a contract librarian in Point Augustine, a small town on an island in southeastern Alaska. The contract was for 6 months, covering for their regular librarian who was on medical leave. It came with a small apartment above the library and a decent salary. On a whim, I applied. I had no real library experience, but apparently no one else wanted the job. A week later, they offered it to me. Getting there was the first sign of how isolated the place was. There are no roads to Point Augustine. You either fly in on a tiny float plane or you take the weekly ferry. I took the ferry. The town itself was small, just a few streets of old wooden houses and storefronts huddled around a harbor with a dense, dark forest pressing in on all sides. It was quiet, the kind of deep, damp quiet that hangs in the air. The job was straightforward. The library was a single large room in the same building as the town hall. My main duty was just to be there to check books in and out for the handful of people who came by each day. The town manager, a woman named Carol, gave me the keys and showed me the apartment upstairs. She was friendly enough in a reserved kind of way. She told me the library ran on a trust system. People here return their books. She said they always have. For the first month, it was a nice change of pace. I read a lot, went for walks along the harbor, and got to know some of the locals by name. They were polite but not overly friendly. I figured that was just the way in a small town. The strangeness started with the book drop. Every morning I had go downstairs and check the metal book drop slot on the front of the building. Most days there would be 3 or 4 books in there, but one Monday morning, I found a book that I did not recognize. It was not part of the library, its collection. There was no barcode, no spine label, no card pocket glued to the inside back cover. It was an old dark green hardcover book with no title on the cover. The pages were yellowed and brittle. It was a ship, its log filled with handwritten entries in faded black ink. The entries detailed the daily life on a fishing vessel called the North Star, and the last entry was dated November 14th, 1978. The final entry was short. It just said, "The fog is wrong. No land in sight. Something is in the water with us." That was it. I asked Carol about it later that day. I showed her the logbook. She looked at it for a moment, her expression unreadable. "The North Star," she said, her voice flat. "That boat went down in a storm. Back in '78, lost the whole crew. My uncle was one of them." She took the book from me. "Sometimes things wash up, I will see. It gets to the historical society." She did not seem to find it strange at all that someone had anonymously put it in the library, its book drop. I tried to put it out of my mind, but a couple of weeks later another one appeared. This time it was a small leather-bound journal. The entries were from a woman in the early 1940s. She wrote about her husband who had gone to work at the logging camp up in the hills and had not come back. The last few pages were filled with the same 2 words written over and over again. "He is hungry. He is hungry." After that, they started showing up more regularly, always on a Monday morning. A tattered collection of letters from a miner who wrote about a strange rhythmic drumming sound he could hear coming from deep within the earth. A childhood sketchbook filled with charcoal drawings of a tall, thin man with no face who stood among the trees. None of them were library books. They were personal histories, each one ending on a note of fear or disappearance. I stopped asking Carol about them. It was clear she did not want to talk about it. I started putting the books in a cardboard box in the back office. I did not know what else to do. The part that really started to get to me was the checkouts. An older man, Mr. Abernathy, came in every Tuesday. He was quiet, always wore the same heavy wool coat, and he always checked out the same type of book, old maps of the island and books on local geology. One afternoon, I was looking through the library, its historical records. I was bored mostly, and I found an old photograph of the town council from 1953 in the back row, looking exactly the same as he did now was Mr. Abernathy. I felt a chill go through me. It had to be his father or his grandfather. People do not stay the same for 60 years. But the next time he came in, I looked at him closely. He had a small crescent-shaped scar above his left eyebrow. The man in the photograph had the same exact scar. I started noticing it with other patrons too. A woman who only checked out books on identifying local flora was in a photo from a town picnic. In 1981, unchanged, a young man who came in to read fishing magazines appeared in a newspaper clipping about a boating accident in the late 90s. He was listed as one of the missing. I never said anything. Who would I tell? What would I even say? I was the outsider here. I just did my job. I had scanned their books and they would nod at me, their eyes quiet and old. They never spoke unless they had to. My contract is up next week. Carol asked if I was interested in staying on permanently. She said the regular librarian, Mrs. Gable, had decided to retire and move to the mainland. Yesterday, I was cleaning out the office desk and found a box of old library cards. I was about to throw it out, but I glanced at the name on top. It was for a book titled Alaskan Shipwrecks. The card had one signature on it from 30 years ago. It was my name. I do not mean someone with the same name. It was my full name in handwriting that looked exactly like my own. I have never been to Alaska before in my life. I told Carol I would not be staying. She just nodded like she expected it. I have my ticket for the ferry on Saturday. The box of journals and logs is still in the back office. Part of me feels like I should take them, show them to someone, but another part of me feels like they belong here. I am starting to think the library is not for the people who live in Point Augustine. I think it is for the people who never left. Working on the remote oil fields up north isn't something most people can handle. The seclusion wears you down. Endless stretches of white tundra, freezing winds, and long nights that seem to never end. I'd been on pipeline maintenance near Port Andrews for almost 6 years when this incident took place. It was February 2018. The pay was excellent. That's the main reason men like me, Carl and Don, kept coming back year after year. Our crew was close. We had relied on each other through snowstorms, equipment breakdowns, and conditions that could end your life before you even had time to call for help. On that rotation, we had just wrapped up a week-long repair on a pipeline section, weakened by repeated freeze-thaw damage. Afterward, the company housed us in one of those prefabricated shelters about 40 miles south of Red Haven, not far off the North Trail Highway, the same icy road the truckers rely on. The drive back should have been simple. We'd done it countless times in Carl's modified Ford F-350, outfitted with tire chains on all four wheels and enough heating to keep us from turning into statues. Don had stretched out in the back seat, dozing while I sat up front, keeping Carl company. He steered us through what had grown into a decent snowstorm. Visibility hovered around 30 feet. At best, the headlights bounced off the swirling snow, creating a white tunnel that gave the feeling of drifting through space. 2 hours into the trip, Carl slammed on the brakes so hard Don was jolted against the back of my seat. Through the snow, barely visible, a figure was staggering along the roadside. No vehicle nearby, no flares, just someone in a thick coat, stumbling in that uneven way that suggested serious hypothermia. Carl didn't hesitate. He pulled over. Nobody survives out there in that kind of weather, not when it's 40 below and dropping. Don snapped awake, cursing about the stop, but quickly went quiet once he saw what we were looking at. We watched for a few moments as the man pushed through snow up to his knees about 20 yards ahead. His parka looked like old military surplus, olive green, trimmed with fur around the hood that whipped around in the wind. Something about his walk struck me as wrong. It wasn't the usual drunken stagger of someone freezing to death. It was more like a repetitive mechanical motion, as though he were following a path only he could see. Carl honked. The horn twice, no reaction. The man kept trudging forward, arms limp. At his sides, "God, he'll freeze out here," Don muttered, already grabbing his door handle. Carl threw the truck into park, and the three of us stepped into the storm. The wind sliced into us sharp as knives, even through our insulated gear. We shouted over the storm as we hurried toward the man at about 10 feet away. Carl gripped his shoulder and turned him. That's when everything shifted. His face was unnaturally pale, not frostbite white, but paper white, almost unnatural. His eyes were cloudy gray, dull like dirty ice, and they didn't seem to focus on us at all. He had dark stubble on his jaw, 3 days worth maybe, and his lips moved constantly, though no sound rose over the wind. But it was the scar that made Carl back away. A deep, jagged line stretching from his temple to his jaw, the kind of mark that said someone had survived an accident they never should have walked away from. "Sir, can you hear me?" Don shouted, waving his hand in front of the man's face. No response. The stranger just swayed gently, those murky eyes staring into something we couldn't see. His lips never stopped moving. Against my better instincts, I leaned closer through the storm. I could just catch what he whispered again and again. 247. Carl and Don exchanged a quick look. We'd all heard about men breaking down from the loneliness out here, but this felt different, wrong in a way that made the hair on my arm stand. Still, we couldn't abandon him. Leaving someone in this weather wasn't an option, and explaining a frozen body to state police would have been worse. It took all three of us to guide him to the truck. He didn't resist, but he didn't help either. He moved like a mannequin, rigid, cold, even through the heavy parka, and strangely, he wasn't shivering at all. Out here, shivering is the body's final weapon against the cold. When it stops, you're in serious danger. This man was icy to the touch, but perfectly still. We got him in the back seat beside Don, who immediately pressed against the far door as if he could melt into it. Carl cranked the heater and pulled us back onto the road. For 10 minutes, nobody said a word. The only sounds were the fan roaring on high and that stranger's lips still forming. Those same numbers. Finally, Don spoke, the thought that hung in all our minds. "Doesn't he look like that snowmobiler who went missing a couple winters ago, the one they found the sled but never found him?" Carl's grip tightened on the wheel. I remembered too. February 2016, a local man named David Krause vanished during a solo trip. They found his snowmobile wrecked against a tree about 15 miles from where we'd just picked this. Man, up there was blood on the seat drag, marks leading into the woods that stopped suddenly. Search teams scoured the area for 2 weeks before calling it off. In that weather, without shelter, he'd have lasted hours at best. He was declared dead. A memorial was held. I'd even heard his brother worked for one of the drilling outfits and used to drink at the Red Haven Tavern. He'd said David had a scar from a childhood accident with a boat propeller. The scar matched perfectly the shelter. Finally came into view, its yellow light dim against the wall of snow. Carl radioed ahead, but the storm drowned the signal. Nothing unusual for conditions like that. The shelter was one of those modular bunkhouses the company planted along the line, reinforced steel, walls, bunks, a kitchenette, and basic comms. Carl parked close, and we readied to take the stranger inside. That's when he spoke. For the first time, his voice was raspy, distorted, like words bubbling up through water. "Not inside, not yet. Not until 247. Don flinched so hard he smacked his head on the doorframe. But there was no way we were leaving him in the truck. Between the three of us, we muscled him inside. The moment we crossed the threshold, he went limp, dead weight. We dropped him onto a bunk. Carl went to check the radio while Don put water on for coffee. I stayed with the man. His pulse was slow but steady up close under the fluorescent lights. More unsettling details stood out. His fingernails were overgrown, yellowed, curling like they hadn't been cut in months. His parka smelled of nothing. No sweat, no dirt, no musk from living. Rough outside, it was an absence of scent altogether. I checked his pockets, empty except for one thing that made my chest tighten: a single snowmobile key attached to a worn leather fob, burned into the leather. D. Krause, 2015. When Don returned with coffee, his face drained at the sight. "That's impossible," he whispered, but we both knew what it meant. Carl came back shaking. His head, the storm made the radio useless. We'd be stuck. 8 to 10 hours. That's when the lights flickered just once, but it put all of us on edge. Backup generators usually made. Outages rare. When I glanced back, the man's cloudy eyes were open again, locked onto the wall clock. It read 11:30 p.m. His lips moved faster now. 2:47 dawn. Gripped my arm, voice shaking. "We need to get out." Now Carl gestured toward the window. Snow was coming down so thick we couldn't even see the truck 10 feet away. We weren't going anywhere. The hours dragged. Carl made sandwiches nobody touched. Don cleaned his gear repeatedly. I stared out the window, praying for a break in the storm. The man lay perfectly still, whispering, eyes never leaving. The clock at 2 a.m. Exhaustion overtook us. Don offered to take first watch while Carl and I collapsed on bunks opposite the room. I didn't think I'd sleep, but adrenaline left me drained. I woke to Don shaking me violently. The clock read 2:46. Carl stood by the door, clutching a wrench. "He's gone," Don stammered. I just looked away for a second. "And he's gone." We searched the entire shelter, 40 feet, nowhere to hide. He had vanished. Then came the sound. 3 knocks against the steel door. Slow, deliberate, the kind of knock that lets you know someone means it. 2:47 a.m. The knocks shifted at the window, then the opposite wall, then back at the door. It circled us, deliberate, measured. Nobody could survive out there, Carl whispered, gripping the wrench tighter, but none of us believed the man had ever been normal. At 2:48, the knocking stopped. Silence pressed in heavy and suffocating. None of us moved until dawn, when the storm cleared at 7 a.m. We rushed outside. No tracks, no prints around the shelter. The snow was untouched, but Don didn't make it to the truck. Carl and I turned, and he was gone. No cry, no struggle, no trace. Just empty space where he'd been. We fled, driving until we reached Fairbanks. We filed a missing persons report, told them we'd picked up a stranger but left out the part about David Krause. 3 days later, state troopers recovered Don's body 15 miles from the shelter, the exact place Krause's snowmobile had crashed 2 years earlier. Frozen solid, lips blue with drag marks leading into the snow that ended abruptly. My family owns a fishing cabin on a Fognak Island off the coast of Kodiak. It is not a fancy place, just a small old-fashioned log cabin that my grandpa has built. We mostly use it in the summer for fishing and hunting, but sometimes during the shoulder seasons I will go out there for a week just to get away from everything I like. The quiet. This past October, after the main fishing season was over and before the snow really hit, I flew out there alone. I took one of those small float planes from Kodiak. The weather was already turning cold and damp, with a lot of low-hanging fog that would roll in off the ocean. The first few days were exactly what I wanted. I spent my time getting the cabin ready for winter, chopping firewood, boarding up some of the windows, just general maintenance. At night I had read a book by the wood stove. No internet, no phone signal, just peace and quiet. The weirdness started on my 3rd night. I was reading, probably around 11 p.m. when I heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from the back of the cabin. It sounded like something was dragging a piece of metal across the ground. Not loud, but very distinct. In the complete silence, I turned off my headlamp and just listened. The scraping sound continued for about 30 seconds, then it stopped. I figured it was probably just a bear, or maybe a large fox messing with some old metal buckets outside. This is Alaska, you know. Animals are always around. I just ignored it and went back to my book. The next morning, I went outside to check the back of the cabin. There is a small lean-to where we keep some old tools and extra firewood. I walked around looking for any signs of an animal. The ground was soft and muddy from the recent rain, so any tracks would have been clear. But there was nothing. No footprints, no paw prints. Not even a disturbed patch of mud. The metal buckets were all where they should be. The next night, the scraping sound came. Back. This time it was louder, and it sounded closer to the cabin. It lasted for a few minutes again from the back of the cabin, then moved around to the side. It was slower this time, a heavy drawn-out scrape. Like something heavy was being dragged, I grabbed the old hunting rifle we keep at the cabin and just sat there in the dark, listening. It eventually faded out, and then everything was silent again. I did not sleep much that night. The next morning, I did another full perimeter check of the cabin. Nothing. No tracks, no disturbances. But as I was walking back to the front door, I saw something in the window. The cabin has these old, thick glass panes, and there was something stuck. To the outside of one of them, it was a single, long, dark hair. It was thick, probably about 8 inches long, and it was caught on a small sliver of wood in the window frame. I pulled it off. It was very coarse, almost like horsehair, but too dark. I do not know why, but I just put it in my pocket. I knew it was not mine. My hair is light brown and short. That afternoon, I decided to take the small aluminum skiff we keep at the cabin out onto the lake. I just wanted to get off the land for a bit. The lake is pretty big, maybe a mile across, and it is surrounded by thick forest. The fog had rolled in again, making everything feel enclosed and quiet. I was just drifting in the middle of the lake, listening to the silence, when I heard it. A sound faint coming from the tree line. On the far side of the lake, it was the scraping sound again. It was not coming from the cabin side of the lake. It was coming from the opposite side. The sound was very clear, even across the water. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was moving along the tree line parallel to the shore. It sounded like it was coming from inside the woods. I just sat there listening. The sound continued for about 5 minutes, slowly moving along the tree line, then it stopped. The lake was completely silent again. I could not see anything through the fog. I immediately started the motor and went back to the cabin. I decided I was leaving the next morning. I did not care about finishing the winterizing. I just packed all my things and got the cabin ready for a quick exit. I left a note for my uncle saying I had an emergency. That night I did not light the stove. I just sat in the dark with my rifle across my lap. I heard the scraping again. It was closer than it had ever been. Before, it sounded like it was right outside the front door, moving slowly. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It lasted for almost 15 minutes. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I just sat there in the dark, listening to whatever it was move around my cabin. It felt like it was listening. 2. The next morning, I got to the lake before the sun was fully up. The float plane was still tied to the dock as I was untying the ropes. I noticed something wedged under the floats of the plane. Where the plane rested on the water, there was another one of those long, dark hairs. It was stuck between the metal and the wood of the float, swaying gently in the water. It looked exactly like the one I had in my pocket. I just left it there. I got in the plane, started the engine, and took off. I never looked back. I have not been back to that cabin since. My uncle uses it now and says it is fine. He does not hear anything, but sometimes when I am out fishing and I hear a faint sound in the distance, I still think about that scraping, and I still wonder what that thing was dragging and why. It was always at my cabin. The late shifts at the fuel stop along mile 237 seemed to stretch on forever, one bleeding into the next, until it felt like time did not exist. I had been working there since the beginning of November, covering the counter while the harsh winter winds shook the windows, and big rigs moved like shadows down the Dalton Highway. For a college student trying to save cash, it paid well enough. The owner, a quiet older man named Harold, did not press me with questions when I asked for extra hours. Most nights were uneventful. Truckers came in for coffee. Locals topped off their tanks, and every now and then a lost traveler wandered through during a storm. The place itself was not much. 2 fuel pumps out front, Small shop with overpriced snacks and a bathroom that barely worked when the pipes were not frozen. Everything shifted on my third Wednesday there. The clock had just passed 2 a.m. when headlights cut through the snow. Outside, an old Ford pickup, its blue paint rusted through and patches rolled. Up to pump number 4 and stopped. The engine kept running, but the driver never moved. No wallet, no fuel, no door opening, just a dark outline sitting still behind the icy windshield. After 10 minutes, I figured maybe the guy had engine trouble or had nodded off. I slipped on my coat, ready to check on him, but before I got outside, the truck suddenly backed up and disappeared into the storm. Odd, but in. A place like that odd was relative. I logged it and went back to restocking shelves, thinking that was the end of it. The next Wednesday, another storm came through, worse than the last. Snow piled high, and the wind made the building creak like it would come apart. Harold had warned me that weather like this could even keep the truckers off the highway. I was in the back room counting boxes when I heard an engine rumble. The wall clock read exactly 2 hours on the security monitor. I saw that same blue Ford parked at pump 4 again. Same spot, same silence. This time I caught more detail. The driver had a heavy coat pulled up over his head, both hands locked on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 position. He did not shift, did not turn the radio, did not even seem to breathe. I let it go for 15 minutes before deciding to approach. But the second I grabbed my keys and stepped toward the door, the truck reverse lights glowed and it rolled away. By the time I reached the pump, the tracks were already filling with snow. The whole thing left me with an uneasy feeling. Something about how still he sat. It was not normal, like watching a clip play on repeat. The rest of that shift I jumped at every pair of headlights, but the Ford never came back. When Harold came in for the morning shift, I mentioned it, trying to sound casual. He shrugged, saying, "You see all types out here, especially when the weather turns," but he would not meet my eyes and his fingers tapped restlessly on the counter. By the third Wednesday, I decided I needed to see it again. I even switched shifts with Karen so I would be working. At 2 a.m. though, I did not say why. The station old camera system recorded on a weekly loop, but I had figured out how to copy clips to a USB. I brought one ready to save whatever I caught. That night the snow was not as heavy, which gave me a clearer view. I sat behind the counter pretending to read, but my attention stayed fixed on pump 4. At 1:58, I heard the familiar rumble. Right on time, the Ford rolled in and parked with exact precision. I zoomed in the cameras as far as the old setup would allow. What I saw chilled me. The driver was not just still, he was unnaturally still. No movement from breathing, no small shifts for comfort. His face stayed hidden under the hood, but his hands looked off. Somehow the skin seemed gray, fingers stiff like they had frozen in place. I recorded every second. Exactly 10 minutes later, the reverse lights came on, but instead of backing straight out, the truck turned, giving the camera a full view of the driver's side. For a brief moment, the hood slipped back and I caught a glimpse of his face. It was human, but not right. Eyes sunk deep, skin weathered and lifeless, an expression completely empty. Not recognition, not emotion, just nothing. I stumbled backward into the display behind me as the truck pulled away. The rest of my shift I replayed the footage, telling myself it was bad lighting or poor video quality, but no matter how many times I watched, the image stayed the same. Whoever or whatever was sitting there was not normal. I saved the recording onto multiple drives and started digging into old records Harold kept in the storage closet binders. Went back decades, delivery notes, maintenance reports, incident logs. That is when I found an entry from December 1993. Complaint: abandoned vehicle at pump 4, 2 a.m. Same description. Blue pickup driver never exits. More notes followed. Always on Wednesdays, always in winter, always at the same time. Behind those logs I found a folder marked Incidents Law Enforcement. Inside were photocopied police files, missing person flyers, old news articles. One stood out: January 1992, about a man named Leonard Price who vanished during a blizzard he had. Been driving home from a mining job when his blue '88 Ford disappeared. Along the Dalton Highway, search crews never found him or the truck. The photo of Leonard matched the face I had seen at the back of. The folder was a printout from 2 years ago. Someone had run the license plate. The result showed it still belonged to Leonard. Missing truck declared lost over 30 years earlier. I tried calling Harold, but he did not answer. Another Wednesday was only days away. I debated quitting, but curiosity and a strange feeling of responsibility kept me there over the next 2 days. I researched. Leonard was 28 when he went missing. He had worked shifts at the mine, left behind a wife and baby daughter. His last radio contact that night mentioned stopping for gas right around mile 237 at about 2 a.m. 3 other disappearances had happened along that same stretch over the years, always during storms, always late at night. That next Wednesday, skies were clear for once. Stars bright overhead, the temperature around -20. I let myself believe maybe it would not happen without a storm, but at 1:45 clouds appeared, and by 1:55 heavy snow was falling again. I was ready. Flashlight, batteries, fresh phone fully charged. Harold number on speed, dial, and a baseball bat within reach. At exactly 2, the Ford appeared. Parked at pump 4, engine idling, driver sitting in silence. This time I did not wait. I grabbed my things and stepped into the storm. The cold stung instantly, the snow blinding. As I pushed closer, I noticed something. The cameras had not shown. Snow was not landing on the truck. It fell all around, but left a perfect dry circle where it sat. Even stranger, the windows had no fog, no condensation. The inside looked as cold as the night. I reached the driver's side and shined the light inside Leonard. His face was clearer than ever, skin cracked and stretched, eyes open but vacant, lips slightly parted. I raised my hand to knock. The instant my knuckles touched the glass, the station lights cut out. Total darkness. My flashlight sputtered and died. Behind me, the truck door creaked open. The backup generator should have kicked on, but it did not. Then light appeared, not from the pumps, but from inside the store. A pale glow through the snow. I saw a figure standing inside, too tall, too thin, staring out. It was Leonard standing inside the locked store, though his truck was still idling behind me. Frost spread across the glass where he stood. I turned back. The driver's seat was empty. The door hung open. When I looked at the station again, Leonard had moved closer, face pressed to the glass. His empty eyes met mine. Then came a sound like wind through pipes, muffled words I could still understand. Still looking for pump 4. Frost webbed across the window. I stumbled back, the bat useless in my grip. The truck engine roared, headlights flashing in a rhythm like a signal. Inside the station, the pale glow pulsed with the lights, and then I saw them, 3 more. Figures behind Leonard, all in winter gear, all staring out. 4 in total. The same number as the missing I had read about. Their mouths moved together, but I could not hear them. Frost formed letters on the glass. Help us find the way. I ran. Not toward the truck, not toward the road. I sprinted to the employee entrance, fumbling keys as those faces followed my every move. From the windows, I shoved the door open, locked it behind me. Emergency lights flared on the store, looked normal again. Number Frost, no figures, only my own breathing. But the truck still idled outside. I called 911, barely making sense while waiting. I grabbed the USB with the recording. That is when I noticed the clock. It read 2:47. My phone showed just 10 minutes since the blackout. When the officer arrived, he found nothing. No truck, no prints but mine. No Frost on the windows. The next morning, I resigned, packed up, and left Alaska altogether, but in heavy snow late at night, I still dream of pump 4, of the words written in ice, and I hope I never learn what they were searching for. My truck broke down just south of a town called Slana. It was not a big town, more of a crossroads with a gas station, a diner, and a few houses. The mechanic at the gas station, an old guy named Gus, told me the part he needed would not be in. For at least a week I did not have the money for a motel, so I asked Gus if he knew of any work. He pointed me towards the diner. Brenda, her always looking for a dishwasher, he said. The diner was small and dated, but it was clean. Brenda, a woman in her late 50s with tired eyes, hired me on the spot. The work was exactly what you would expect, scraping plates and running them through a big, steaming industrial dishwasher. The diner was only open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and it was the only place to eat for 50 miles, so it had a steady stream of customers, mostly truckers and locals. For the first few days, everything was normal. I had work my shift, listened to the low hum of the kitchen, and then walk back to the small room Gus let me use behind the garage. It was a simple, quiet routine. That is when I started to notice the orders. There was a group of regulars who came in every single night. It was always the same 4 men. They had sit in the back booth and they would not talk much. They looked like they worked outdoors. Their clothes were worn, and their faces were weathered. Brenda always served them herself. She never wrote down their order, and they never spoke it. She would just go to their table, nod, and then come back to the kitchen. The first time she came to the pass-through window and said to the cook, "4 well done." The cook, a quiet guy named Sam, just nodded. He pulled 4 thick, unmarked steaks from a separate small freezer beneath his grill. He never used that freezer for any of the other orders. He cooked them until they were almost charred, put them on plates by themselves. No fries, no vegetables, and Brenda would take them to the back booth. The strange part was what came back to the dish pit every single time. The plates were completely clean. Not just scraped clean, but clean like they had been wiped with a cloth. There was never any grease, no residue. Nothing. The first time I thought it was a fluke. But it was. The same every night. 4 plates, 4 sets of silverware, all of it spotless. I got curious, so one night I asked Sam what cut of steak that was. He was scraping the grill and did not look at me. "It is just the special," he said, his voice flat. I asked him where it came from. He stopped scraping for a second. "Brenda handles the ordering for that," he said, and it was clear from his tone that the conversation was over. A few days later, I was taking the trash out after closing. The back door of the diner opened into a small, fenced-in area with our dumpsters. As I was heading back inside, I saw Brenda talking to one of the men from the back booth. It was dark, but the kitchen light illuminated them. The man was giving Brenda a cooler, one of those heavy-duty, expensive ones. It looked heavy. He did not say a word. He just handed it to her, nodded, and then walked off into the darkness. Brenda took the cooler inside and immediately locked it in that same small freezer under the grill. I knew I should not, but the next day before my shift started, I went into the kitchen. It was empty. I walked over to the small freezer. It was locked with a padlock that more than anything felt wrong. We kept hundreds of dollars worth of normal inventory in the main walk-in freezer, and it was never locked. That night, one of the men came in alone. He sat in the usual booth. Brenda went over and I saw him shake his head. She came back to the kitchen and said to Sam, "Just 1 well done." Sam cooked the single steak and Brenda served it, but for the rest of the night she kept glancing at the front door. She seemed anxious. The man finished his meal, left some cash on the table, and walked out. The plate came back to me perfectly clean as always. About an hour before closing, the local sheriff came in. He got a cup of coffee and was chatting with Brenda. I was stacking dishes and could overhear them. He said they had found a hunter, his truck abandoned out on an old logging road. No sign of the hunter. Brenda just poured him more coffee and nodded slowly. "That happens sometimes," she said quietly. "This is a big country." My truck was finally fixed last Friday. I worked my last shift, and Brenda paid me in cash as I was leaving. She put her hand on my arm. "You are a good worker," she said, "but you are just passing through. That is for the best." Her expression was serious. It did not feel like a casual comment. It felt like A warning, I got in my truck and drove away. As I was leaving town, I saw the 3 other men from the diner. They were standing by the side of the road next to their truck, just watching me go. I am on the road now heading south, but I cannot stop thinking about that diner and the small padlocked freezer, and I keep wondering, what is going to happen the next time a traveler his truck breaks down in that town? In October 2019, everything shifted between me and my father. We had been planning a moose hunt in the Talora River basin of northern Alaska for months. It was our first real trip together since I had moved to Portland for work. About 3 years earlier, I was 28, working in consulting, and honestly had not spent more than a weekend with him since my college days. I was 28, working in consulting. He had been hunting that basin for over 20 years. He knew every ridge, stream, and patch of timber like it was his own property. We drove out from Fairbanks in his old Dodge Ram rifles, stored safely, camping gear packed tight in the back. Both of us were genuinely looking forward to 5 uninterrupted days. In the wilderness, no cell towers, no work emails, no constant noise. The plan was simple: track moose, hope for a clean shot, and enjoy the quiet. That first day went exactly the way we wanted. We hiked roughly 6 miles from where we parked and set up camp beside a narrow creek that cut through a valley of spruce and birch. My father had that familiar confidence he always showed in the woods, pointing out tracks, explaining how the wind shifted, telling stories of past hunts in the same region. The weather was cool but manageable, maybe mid-30s with clear skies and that sharp golden autumn light filtering down through the trees. We pitched the tent, organized our packs, and mapped out the next morning route while sharing a thermos of coffee laced with whiskey. It felt calm, ordinary, almost like any other time we had been outdoors together. We were tired from the hike, talking quietly about family, about work, about life in general. Neither of us had the slightest idea that something was already watching us. Things started to feel strange the next morning. After about 3 hours of hiking along a game trail that wound through rocky slopes, Father suddenly froze. He was staring ahead about 30 yards, his expression shifting from casual to uneasy. When I caught up, I saw what he had spotted. It was the remains of a caribou, but not like any predator kill I had ever seen. The bones had been stripped completely bare, unnaturally clean, and laid out in a deliberate pattern. They formed a rough circle around a flat slab of rock, with the skull positioned in the center, its hollow sockets pointed up at the sky. The longer bones radiated outward, almost like spokes on a wheel. Father crouched beside the remains, running his hand along one of the bones. He had hunted for over 20 years. He had seen bear kills, wolf packs, even mountain lion strikes, but this was not like any of those. The bones were too neatly arranged, too sterile, and the ground around it, no prints, no blood, no disturbed brush, not a single sign of a struggle. "Evan," he said quietly, using my full name, which he rarely did. "I have never seen anything like this before. Whatever did this, it is big enough to bring down a caribou, but smart enough not to leave a single trace." We searched the area for nearly 10 minutes, circling wider and wider, but came up empty. No fur, no drag marks, no broken branches. It was as if the animal had simply appeared, dissected its kill with surgical precision, arranged the bones, and disappeared. We pressed on, though both of us were shaken. Father kept glancing over his shoulder, and I caught myself scanning the tree line more often than usual. About 2 miles further, we found another kill. This time it was a ptarmigan. The tiny bones had been arranged in a small circle around a smooth river stone, with its skull resting perfectly in the middle. No feathers scattered, no sign of a predator attack. Just the same eerie, sterile precision. Father lifted one delicate wing bone and held it to the light. "This is surgical work," he muttered under his breath. "No wild animal cleans bones like this." As the day went on, we found more sites, 5 in total. A ground squirrel placed around a chunk of quartz, the remains of a marten carefully arranged around a flat piece of shale. Each display felt deliberate, meticulous, and what unsettled me most was that the kills were getting fresher the deeper we hiked. The first caribou looked like it had been there for weeks, the last few smelled of fresh blood, the metallic tang still hanging in the air. Father started carrying, his rifle at the ready. Neither of us wanted to say it aloud, but we both knew we were being tracked. Something was moving just ahead of us, preparing these grim arrangements as though it wanted us to see them. That night we camped in a clearing surrounded by heavy spruce cover. Father insisted we keep the fire going all night and take turns on watch. Something we had never done before. I took the first shift sitting with my back against a log, rifle across my lap, listening to every snap of twigs in the dark. Around 2 a.m. during Father his shift, he woke me by whispering urgently. His face was pale in the firelight as he pointed across the clearing. There, he whispered, between those spruces. Tell me what you see. I turned slowly. 2 massive yellow eyes reflected the flames about 8 feet off the ground, unblinking and still. They were not the green glow you see from deer or moose. These were golden, almost alive, and they radiated intelligence. The eyes stayed fixed on us for what felt like forever. Though it was probably 15 minutes, they did not blink, did not move, did not breathe. Just that steady, cold stare. Father had his rifle trained, but there was no body shape behind them, only the eyes suspended in darkness. When dawn came and the gray light touched the trees, the eyes were simply gone. We scoured the area. No prints, no broken branches. Nothing by day 3. Both of us were exhausted and jumpy. After 4 hours of hiking, we reached a ridge that overlooked the basin. Father was scanning with his binoculars when he suddenly went stiff. Good Lord, he whispered, handing me the binoculars with a trembling hand. Tell me I am not seeing things. I looked across the valley. Nearly 800 yards away stood the largest wolf I had ever laid eyes on. But calling it a wolf did not feel right. It was enormous, easily the size of a small horse, with a massive head and shoulders far too broad for any normal canine. Its coat was pitch black with streaks of silver along its back that shimmered in the sun. It stood perfectly still, facing us as though it had been waiting. Father fumbled with his rifle, but it was far too distant for a reliable shot. Then, without warning, the creature turned and moved along the ridge. The way it moved chilled me. It flowed, almost liquid, covering rough ground with impossible grace. Every so often it would stop, turn back and watch us just long enough for us to notice before continuing. It was showing us its control, its dominance. That is when it clicked. The bone patterns, the fresh kills, the eyes in the night. It had all been deliberate. We were not hunting in its territory. It was hunting us. Father seemed to realize the same thing. He grabbed my arm. We are leaving now. This thing has been toying with us. We packed fast, abandoning the hunt as we descended. I glanced back one last time through the binoculars. The wolf was sitting on the ridge like some ancient guardian, watching us retreat. I swear its posture radiated satisfaction. The hike back to the truck took 6 straight hours. We barely spoke, both of us scanning the ridges and tree lines, knowing it was out there, shadowing us. When we reached the ram, Father threw our gear into the bed with shaking hands and started the engine before I had even closed the door. As we drove away, I looked into the side mirror at the fading wilderness, and I could still feel those golden eyes on us. We never returned. Father sold his hunting rifles the next spring. Neither of us ever spoke about what we saw again, but we both knew we had encountered something that should not exist, an apex predator, intelligent, deliberate, and terrifying, and we had been lucky to walk away alive. The reindeer migration assignment seemed like the perfect chance to push my career forward as a field biologist. After 6 years of working on smaller projects, I was finally given the opportunity to head a team examining how shifting weather patterns were affecting migration routes near the Coldwater River. The project Was approved in late April of 2017, and within 2 weeks I was deep in the Canadian wilderness with a crew of 5. Our task was to track 43 reindeer fitted with GPS collars over a 3-week period, recording their movements and daily habits. The information we collected could directly shape conservation policy across the area, making this one of the most significant projects I had ever joined. I remember the mix of responsibility and excitement I felt as we packed up our supplies, thermal drones, signal trackers, camping gear, everything we would need for an extended stay far away from civilization. Our camp was set up on an abandoned lumber site that had been unused since the 1980s. The location worked perfectly for our needs: flat ground for equipment, access to the river for water, and a spot right along one of the main migration paths. But there was something strange about the place. Rusting machinery was half buried under moss, and collapsing wooden sheds were slowly being swallowed by the forest. My team consisted of Dr. Richard Morrison, our project director, Lisa Tran from the university, its wildlife faculty, and 2 graduate students named Ben and Marisol. We had worked together before, so we already knew how to organize the camp, divide the tasks, and settle into a daily rhythm. The first several days went smoothly with steady signals coming in from all the tagged animals. The work was routine but rewarding. Each morning we'd gather around the camp stove with our coffee, watching dozens of red dots move across our laptop screens. The reindeer were behaving as expected, resting in feeding grounds during the day, moving north. At night, Lisa managed the drone flights, capturing heat-based footage to pair with the GPS data. Ben and Marisol monitored the frequencies while Dr. Morrison and I analyzed routes and updated the records. The weather stayed cooperative: chilly mornings, mild afternoons, and crisp, clear nights, ideal for keeping the gear running properly. By day 5, we had already logged unusual shifts in migration routes, exactly the sort of findings that gave the project weight. Everything was working just as we had planned. Still, little things about the old lumber camp kept catching my eye. Certain trees had perfectly straight cuts, too clean for the older equipment supposedly used there. The foundations of the old structures formed neat geometric patterns, like someone had designed the site with a strict layout in mind. Most oddly, we uncovered a set of metal plates hidden under decades of fallen leaves. Each one was stamped with sequential numbers but bore no dates, no company logos, no identifying marks at all. Dr. Morrison mentioned that lumber operations from that period usually left obvious traces: company stamps, tagged trees, labeled equipment. But here, it all seemed strangely stripped of detail, almost as if someone had gone out of their way to erase the site, its history. We put it out of our minds, though, focusing on the research. That all changed on the night of May 15th. I was going over log entries in my tent near midnight when Ben rushed in from the monitoring station, his face pale. "You have got to see this right away," he said. Every single GPS signal, 43 in total, had gone offline at exactly 11:17 p.m. Not gradually, not one at a time, but all at once, as if a switch had been thrown. The system showed no glitches, no error codes. Lisa ran checks on the receivers, while Dr. Morrison examined the backups, but all of our equipment was running fine for 3 hours. We tried to reconnect, tweaking frequencies, boosting signals, sending out direct pings, but nothing came back. The reindeer had disappeared from the network entirely. After that, the forest went silent. Normally, the nights in northern Canada are filled with sound owls, shifting branches, animals moving through brush, but following the blackout, even those natural noises seemed to vanish. It left us in an eerie, heavy silence. We agreed to rotate shifts through the night, hoping the signals might return. Dr. Morrison took the first watch, then Lisa, then Ben. By the time it was my turn around 4 a.m., I was alone in the monitoring tent, staring at blank screens and scrolling through data logs, searching for a reason. Nothing made sense, especially not the fact that every collar cut off at the exact same second. By sunrise, we decided to check the last known location of the nearest herd, about 6 miles northeast of camp. The hike through thick forest was tense. None of us spoke much. When we reached the spot, there was nothing, no tracks, no droppings, no animals, but our equipment was right where we had set it the day before, working fine and recording data as usual. It was as though the reindeer had evaporated, leaving the monitoring tools untouched, Lisa suggested. Broadening the search, so we spent the entire day combing through nearly 12 miles of terrain. Nothing turned up. That night, Lisa went over the drone footage from the previous evening, hoping to find something we had missed. We all crowded into the main tent to watch the thermal recordings most of. It was uneventful: trees, occasional small animals, the usual, but at 11:15 p.m., just 2 minutes before the GPS signals cut off, something strange appeared. 7 tall figures emerged from the tree line, walking in perfect unison across an open space near camp. They looked humanoid, but off too tall, too precise. Their body heat showed up as warmer than the background, but cooler than a normal person. What unsettled us most was the way they moved. Exact spacing, identical gestures, crossing obstacles without breaking rhythm, like multiple parts of the same organism. When the lead figure lifted its arm, all 7 did the same at the same instant. The room went quiet. Dr. Morrison replayed the clip several times, studying every movement. Ben kept insisting it must have been a glitch, but Lisa and I knew better. The footage was too consistent. Whatever those things were, they were not a technical error. That night we enforced stricter rules. No one left their tent alone, and hourly check-ins continued until morning. Still, I barely slept, listening to every sound. Outside around 3 a.m., I heard Marisol whispering to Ben in the next tent, but when I asked if something was wrong, she said it had just been a nightmare. The following morning brought something worse. At breakfast, Ben did not show up. His cot was empty, but his bag, jacket, and gear were neatly arranged. His boots were gone. We searched the camp and the nearby woods, calling for him. Dr. Morrison started talking about alerting authorities. I decided to check the riverbank. That is where I found his boots set perfectly parallel on a flat rock, laces tied neatly facing the water. No dirt, no scuff marks, completely dry despite the damp air. Strangers still there were no footprints anywhere. None leading to them, none leading away. It was as if the boots had been placed there by someone who had not touched the ground. We tore through the surrounding area for hours, but there was nothing. Finally, we broke camp and made our way to the closest location where we could call for help. Search and rescue crews arrived, combing the forest with helicopters and dogs for 4 days. Not a trace of Ben was ever found. The official explanation was that he had likely fallen into the river, but that did not explain the boots. Investigators brushed that off as unimportant. Half a year later, I got a call from a forestry worker. Doing surveys near the abandoned lumber site, he had uncovered one of our GPS collars under a stack of rocks. It was still functioning and showed that it had been sitting in that exact spot since May 15th at 11:17 p.m. The very moment all the signals vanished, it was from one of the missing reindeer. I never went back there. I never took another assignment in that region. Some things are better left unknown. Whenever Alaska comes up in conversation, I feel my stomach tighten. Most people think of endless forests, untouched wilderness, and the northern lights, but for me, the memory that surfaces is the night at Timber Falls Lodge. At that point, I had just wrapped up my junior year of college and picked up a seasonal job as a receptionist and handyman at a small lodge near Glacier Ridge National Park. It was June 2022, and for 3 months that place was my entire universe. The lodge itself was remote, with 12 modest cabins spread across the property, each connected by gravel paths. That crunched no matter how carefully you walked. Our closest neighbor lived almost 40 miles away, and there was absolutely no cell reception. The only way to reach the outside world was through a single crackly landline in the main office, and even that worked only half the time nights were. So still, it often felt like the rest of the world had ceased to exist. That week, its guests were mostly hikers and nature photographers, people who came to escape cities and human noise. Among them was a trio staying in cabin 7, a man named Daniel, his girlfriend Rebecca, and their Friend Sean Daniel was the type who filled every silence with chatter jokes, stories or questions, keeping everyone laughing at mealtimes. Rebecca, by contrast, was quiet, watchful, always observing before speaking. Sean sat somewhere in the middle, friendly but often keeping to himself. Their days were spent trekking through trails, returning at dusk, worn out, mosquito-bitten and muddy. On the surface, they looked like any group of friends traveling together, but I kept sensing something strained in the air, especially between Daniel and Sean. The day things unraveled began like all the rest. I spent hours fixing a broken water heater in cabin 3, then stocking up supplies in the main lodge. The weather had been unusually warm, and by evening the air buzzed with mosquitoes under the dim Alaskan twilight that never turns fully dark in summer. Around 9 p.m., I spotted Daniel, Rebecca, and Sean heading to the bathhouse, a small wooden building set about 100 yards from the main lodge. Sean carried a towel, clearly eager for a proper wash after their hike. Daniel and Rebecca followed, and I could hear Daniel, his voice carrying louder and sharper. As they walked farther away, I could not make out his words, but his tone made me pause. As I locked up the office, then I brushed it off. Guests argued sometimes, especially when tired and isolated. An hour later, while reading in my small staff cabin, I caught the sound of voices outside. At first, I assumed it was just other guests heading in for the night, but the tone quickly sharpened, frantic, urgent. Rebecca, her voice rang out, calling that Sean was missing. Setting my book down, I listened carefully. She and Daniel were moving across the property, knocking on cabin doors, asking if anyone had seen him. Their words carried a panic that made my skin prickle. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out just as Rebecca noticed me. She hurried over, pale even in the dim light. Daniel right behind her, eyes wide and unsettled. She blurted out that Sean had disappeared after an argument near the bathhouse, but when I pressed for specifics, their answers faltered. Rebecca first said Sean had clashed with a stranger loitering nearby, then Daniel cut in, insisting the stranger had been lurking for hours, watching people. But their descriptions of this stranger did not match at all. Rebecca described a tall man with dark hair. Daniel swore he was shorter, with a beard. Their conflicting stories made the whole scene feel staged, like they were reciting panic rather than experiencing it. Rebecca twisted her hands and glanced around nervously while Daniel paced, running his fingers repeatedly through his hair. I suggested we check the bathhouse first. Maybe Sean had simply stormed off to cool down. As we headed there, I caught Daniel giving Rebecca quick looks, sharp and deliberate, that set me on edge. The bathhouse itself was empty, but the area told another story. The bench outside was overturned, and the dirt showed marks like someone had been dragged or had fallen hard. Rebecca broke into tears, saying we needed the police immediately. When I pointed out the office landline, Daniel pushed back, insisting we search the grounds first, claiming Sean probably wandered off and would turn up. The false calm in his voice told me he wanted control of the situation. I agreed to help search, but resolved privately to call authorities the first chance I got. We spent the next hour with flashlights combing trails, shouting Sean his name into the dark forest. Nothing answered but the wind. Rebecca kept asking what the plan was, but Daniel repeatedly redirected her away from contacting help. By midnight, we gave up and returned, drained and uneasy. I told them firmly that I was going to call the state troopers. Daniel, his expression hardened instantly. He grabbed my arm, urging me to wait until morning, saying Sean would come back and we had be wasting everyone its time. Rebecca disagreed, insisting his family needed to know now. They argued in front of me, voices tight with desperation. During that exchange, I noticed fresh scratches across Daniel, his forearms deep, angry, the kind that looked like they came from fingernails. When I asked, he claimed he got them from pushing through brush during our search. But the marks did not look like bramble scratches. They looked defensive. I eventually convinced them to walk back to the lodge so I could call inside. The building felt unnervingly silent. When I lifted the receiver, the line was dead, no dial tone at all. I checked the cord, the outlet, everything, but it was completely cut off. Daniel was quick to blame the weather, but the skies had been clear all day. Rebecca meanwhile paced the room in agitation, muttering that they needed help somehow. I told them I had drive into town first thing in the morning. Daniel jumped in, volunteering to go himself, claiming he knew the way better. His eagerness to leave made me suspicious. I insisted we stay together until Sean was found. Daniel and Rebecca exchanged another of those charged glances. We decided to wait for daylight, and I suggested they remain in the main lodge. Overnight, Rebecca agreed at once, but Daniel hesitated, saying he wanted to grab their belongings from cabin 7. I watched him walk away, his movements tense and purposeful. Something in me decided not to let him out of sight. I slipped out the back door, following at a distance. Daniel went inside their cabin and stayed there nearly 10 minutes. When he emerged, he carried a bulky duffel bag that sagged with weight far heavier than clothing alone. Under his arm, something wrapped in a towel. His eyes darted nervously as he headed back. I managed to return to the lodge ahead of him, pretending to be half asleep in a chair. When he re-entered, Rebecca was curled up on the sofa, awake, but pretending otherwise. The rest of that night stretched endlessly, none of us sleeping. By early morning, I suggested we revisit the bathhouse. In daylight, Daniel resisted, immediately claiming it was pointless, but Rebecca insisted reluctantly. He gave in as we approached. Daniel kept positioning himself between us, as if trying to direct what we noticed. In the brighter light, details stood out: faint dried stains on the wooden steps, patches of disturbed soil, and a piece of torn fabric snagged on a bush. When Rebecca reached toward it, Daniel stopped her, warning not to touch evidence, but his tone felt less protective of evidence and more protective of himself. At about 7 a.m., the distant chop of a helicopter carried across the forest. Daniel, his face drained of color. He immediately suggested packing and leaving, while Rebecca stared upward, whispering that she hoped it was help. The helicopter touched down in the clearing, and 2 state troopers and a medic stepped out for a moment. I wondered how they even knew, but then realized someone else must have raised the alarm. One trooper asked if we were the ones who reported a missing person. Before I could respond, Daniel jumped in, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that Sean had wandered off and likely returned to town. The trooper looked doubtful and asked to speak with us separately, starting with Rebecca. While she spoke with them, Daniel leaned close, whispering that I should go, along with his story that everything was fine and Sean would turn up. His face was slick with sweat despite the chill, and his hand fiddled at his pocket. Then the medic approached, telling us Sean had been found 2 miles downstream near an old mining road. He was alive but badly injured, with several stab wounds. A passing trucker had spotted him after he dragged himself to the roadside. He had been airlifted to Fairbanks for emergency care. I looked at Daniel. His face had gone gray, eyes fixed on the ground. Rebecca began to cry, but it was not relief, it was dread. Later that day, troopers arrested Daniel after finding a knife wrapped in the towel from his cabin. Rebecca confessed to helping him move Sean afterward. She explained that Daniel had snapped during an argument over money, stabbing Sean, and together they had tried to cover it up, thinking he was dead. The phone line had been deliberately cut with wire cutters from Daniel. His bag. Rebecca cooperated with investigators and received a lighter sentence. Daniel was charged with attempted murder. I quit the job the following day and never returned to Alaska. Even now, I sometimes wake wondering what would have happened if that truck driver had not spotted Sean in time. Every summer, my Uncle Mark would take me on fishing trips to remote parts of Alaska. He is the type who believes phones ruin people, and that real life starts when you are knee-deep in mud. On this particular trip, we camped near a bend of the Katuk River outside of a small town called Nolan. The bank there dropped off unevenly, tangled with roots and hard-packed dirt. That spring, I had just turned 13, and it was my first year getting my own equipment: rod, boots, even a small fillet knife. I felt like I had finally been promoted to the grown-up team, even though I still had to use the smaller tent at camp. It was early afternoon when Mark headed upriver to check his traps, leaving me at camp with strict instructions: do not go far and keep the fire alive. The sky was hazy, the sunlight filtering through thin clouds giving the whole place a dull quiet. I set myself up along the river with my tackle box and a thermos of black coffee. I was not supposed to be drinking. The water drifted lazily, carrying moss and sticks in slow, wide loops. I remember watching the surface like it was a movie screen. No phone, no noise, just the river and the breeze. Then I heard a voice behind me. At first I figured it was my uncle trying to sneak up. The tone was odd though, light, almost friendly, like someone talking to a nervous animal. I turned and saw a man standing halfway down the slope that led into the trees. His camouflage jacket was stained with layers of old dirt and his wool cap was stretched like it did not fit right. I did not know him. He was not from the little shop in Nolan, and I had not seen him around the campgrounds. He grinned, showing a gap where one of his teeth should have been, and said he was a local guide. Claimed he was hauling gear for hunters and needed an extra hand. Something about him felt off. He barely moved as he spoke, feet planted, hands tucked behind him only, tilting his chin toward the woods. When he motioned where to go, I asked which outfitter he worked with. He dodged the question, laughed thinly, and said I looked tough enough to carry some crates. He pointed deeper into the trees, insisting it was not far, just beyond a ridge. My knees tightened on their own, like my body was answering before my mind had decided. I said I needed to grab my boots, really just stalling. He stepped closer anyway, like he had not heard. Only a few feet, but too close. His boots pressed deep into the soft bank, leaving big prints that looked like he had been pacing there a while. That is when I noticed the back of his pants soaked halfway up the thighs, not the light splashes you would get from walking through the river, but darker, like he had been kneeling in wet ground for a long time. He flicked his eyes toward the trail again, but there was no sign of any gear, just thickets, branches bent low like someone had shoved through them not long ago. I told him no, clear and firm, the way my uncle always told me to speak if something did not feel right. He did not answer, just stood there staring, jaw tightening once. Then he gave a short laugh through his nose and muttered something I only half heard. Sounded like, "They never learn." I started backing away, not turning around, keeping the river behind me like it could protect me somehow. The quiet felt heavy, like if I stopped moving or talking, something bad would happen. I edged backward until I reached the log that marked the trail to camp, that is. When he stepped forward again, slow and steady, and said, "You do not want to be out here when it gets dark." It did not sound like a threat, more like a weather report, just a plain fact. I did not reply. I spun around and ran. I did not look back to see if he followed. I did not hear steps, but the silence felt untrustworthy. The woods seemed thicker, branches dipping, lower shadows leaning closer. By the time I reached the tents, I had no sense of how long I had been gone. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. Camp looked the same, but off somehow, like it had shifted. I did not see my uncle at first and panicked, thinking maybe the man had gotten to him, but smoke drifted from the fire pit, and a moment later Mark came from behind the truck, wiping his hands with a rag. He asked if I had caught anything. I told him no, and that we should head back early. He studied me but did not argue. That same afternoon, we packed and left. Mark did not ask questions until we were halfway down the gravel road toward Nolan. I told him what happened as straight as I could. He got quiet, not mad, just locked in thought, like replaying maps and faces. He asked what the man looked like, what he had said, and where exactly I had seen him. I mentioned the wet pants, the missing tooth, the way he kept his hands out of sight. When we reached town, Mark stopped briefly at the ranger station. I waited in the truck with the window cracked, my fishing rod untouched in the back. That night at the motel, the TV was on while we ate. I was not paying attention until Mark turned the volume up. A missing kid alert. A boy named Ryan, 15, last seen near another campsite not far from ours 4 days earlier. They had no leads, just that he had last been spotted talking to a man in camouflage, possibly local. The picture of the boy hit me hard. Taller than me, but he looked like any regular teenager just trying to enjoy the trip. Probably never expected things to twist like that. I hardly slept that night. I kept thinking about how fast it could have gone wrong if I had said yes, if I had followed, if I had hesitated even a moment longer. It is not like I was brave. I just listened to that gut feeling when something does not add up. I still remember the man, his voice sometimes calm when he told me not to be out there alone, not frustrated, not threatening, just certain, like he was not predicting. He already knew. We have not camped at that spot since Mark sticks closer to town now. I never saw that man again. Nobody was ever caught. The boy Ryan was never found. Every so often his name comes up online in forums like this, and every time I think about reporting my story again. But the truth is, I have already told what I know. Maybe writing this here is just my way of reminding anyone who reads it. When your instincts say something is wrong, even if it does not make sense, listen to them, especially then. I still cannot explain why I did not just turn back that day. Maybe it was denial, maybe I did not want to admit something was not right. My son and I were supposed to be on our way to a wrestling meet in Devgar, just the two of us. His name is Ryan, 16 years old, into sports, the type to toss his gym bag in the back seat like it was nothing. I had taken the weekend off from my job at a small clinic, packed our things, topped off the car at a Bharat fuel station near Lakshmi Bypass Road, and figured we would make it there before dark. The drive was not new to me. We had taken that route twice before for other school events. I told myself this would be a simple trip. Quiet roads, maybe even some time for us to actually talk without interruptions. About half an hour south of Greenvale, I spotted the truck. It had darkly tinted windows and a faded gray paint job, not shiny or noticeable, just average enough to disappear into traffic. It pulled into my lane behind us right after the last petrol station. At first I brushed it off. Highways are long and empty in that stretch, so sometimes vehicles naturally end up together. But this one did not drift off. It stayed tight on us, too close. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting it to overtake me, but it never did. I shifted a bit toward the shoulder, slowed down slightly to encourage it to go around. Instead, it adjusted its speed exactly with mine, holding the same narrow distance, almost like it was linked to us. I pointed it out to Ryan, trying not to sound nervous. He looked up from his phone for a second and muttered, "Creepy." He was not wrong. I tried testing the driver, speeding up a little, then easing under the limit. Every move was copied. I tapped the brakes twice, something my father used to do when people followed too closely. No change. I switched lanes without a reason, still right behind me. The strange part was there was no aggression, no honking, no revving, no lights flashing, just steady, controlled tailing, like we were being pushed somewhere. I did not want Ryan to see how uneasy I was, but the feeling in my chest grew heavier. This was not an absent-minded driver. It was intentional. Turning back was not an option. And cell reception there was spotty at best. I told Ryan to check the Maps app for the nearest lit-up spot, maybe a rest area, maybe a shop. He found a rest stop about 10 minutes ahead, barely marked on the map, but it was something. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, knuckles starting to ache, but I kept my tone calm. When we reached it, disappointment sank in. The stop was just a gravel clearing with one broken street lamp flickering weakly, a vending machine rusting in the corner that looked decades out of order, and a single crooked portable toilet leaning in the mud. No cars, no people, just the faint hum of a river nearby and the wind moving through the trees. I slowed and pulled in anyway, thinking maybe the truck would just continue down the highway, but it did not. It followed, rolling in slowly and deliberately. I saw Ryan sit upright. He tried to look composed, but I could tell by his silence that he was holding his breath. The truck did not park alongside us. It angled in behind my car, blocking the only exit like it had planned it. I could not tell the exact model, probably an older GMC or Chevy from the late 90s, but something about the front grille looked wrong, reinforced, almost homemade, like extra bars had been welded across it. My headlights reflected off its windshield, but the tint was too dark to see. Inside, no one stepped out. just the engine idling low, a steady rumble. That filled the empty space. I told Ryan, "Stay in the car," and reached for my phone. No signal. Ryan whispered that he was already filming. He had angled his phone low on the dashboard, recording without moving much. I had not even asked him, he just knew. I told him quietly to keep recording no matter what I thought about honking, maybe to startle whoever was inside, or at least create some noise, though I doubted anyone would hear out there before I could. The driver's side door clicked open slightly, just a few inches, then it shut again. No one got out. Nothing happened after that. The move felt deliberate, like they wanted us to. No, they were there watching, deciding that was the moment I stopped telling myself I was imagining things I did not want to reverse straight into them, but they had us pinned to the right, was a sharp ditch too. The left, thick woods. If I tried pushing forward across the grass, I might get stuck, so I stayed put, engine still on doors, locked. The truck rolled forward just an inch, barely moving, but enough to set me off. I shouted, "What do you want?" Ryan gripped my arm, whispering, "Mom, do not." The driver stayed still, only that low engine hum. On instinct, I slammed my hand on the horn, a long, drawn-out blast that echoed off the trees and the highway in the distance. That finally broke the silence. The truck jerked backward, reversing hard and spraying gravel. But it did not leave it. Stopped again at the exit, angled halfway toward the road, like the driver was debating whether to stay or go. I shoved the car into drive, pointed toward the ditch, and pressed the pedal all the way down. We jolted hard over the edge, the bottom of the car scraping as we bounced through the mud, but somehow made it across to the far side and back onto the highway. I did not check the mirror until I was sure we were clear. When I finally did, the truck was gone. Not behind us, not in the lot, just gone. Ryan ended the recording, and we drove for another 20 minutes in silence until the road brought us into a busier area. Only then could I breathe properly. I pulled into a crowded supermarket parking lot and had Ryan email me the video right away, just to be safe. We sat there for a while before I finally called the police. I did not care if it sounded over the top. I knew what we had gone through was not normal. It was not impatience, and it was not some prank. The officer who met us did not dismiss it. I showed him the video and he recognized the truck. Immediately, he would not give every detail, but he said it matched the description of a man they had been trying to locate for months. The same vehicle had been reported in at least 3 other roadside incidents across the Varnish stretch, late afternoons, always women driving alone or with children. Nothing had turned violent yet, but the pattern was intensifying. He said Ryan, his recording was the clearest piece of evidence they had so far, and it might finally be enough for them to take action. We never heard what came of it, maybe because of legal reasons they did not share updates, but since that day, I have never driven that road again.